This is the first tutorial on coding with NVivo 12, and it covers deductive and topic coding. I will first say a bit about how to identify a framework, then we create some notes and a framework, followed by some coding and uncoding using some examples, and finally I'll give a couple of small hints. For this tutorial, I came up with an imaginary project that seeks to answer the question, what is the role of community centers in our society? And there are obviously different ways of how one could go about answering this question, but I think a very straightforward approach would be to look for official documents that tell us what a community center is and what it does, and then collect some primary data through observation, interviews, focus groups, and so on. So for this example, I will use a strategic framework document as my coding framework, and I will then show you how I code my notes that relate to a website as well as the focus group transcripts. And all these three items I mention here were uploaded or created in the first tutorial. You can, of course, also build your initial coding framework from a theory or from multiple theories. And if you have more than one theory, you're likely to have competing hypotheses. And these, I think, should then be reflected in your coding framework. Topic coding is another type of coding, which is quite similar to deductive coding, and the steps are the same as for deductive coding. So therefore, I included this also here in the title. However, in the case of topic coding, we have topics that are picked by the researcher, and that is quite useful when you have a lot of data, because that can help you to organize your data into smaller and more manageable chunks. So this is often something that happens maybe before you do some analytical coding. Back to our imaginary project, you can see that this is quite a long document, but I have picked these two sections, one on activities and services and the other one on benefits of community centers, which we will use for our examples. We are now in the notes section in NVivo, and we can see that there are no notes, and we want to now create the notes for the activities and the benefits of community centers. To start, we either click on Note in the top menu, or we right-click and then select New Node. And then we get this window. As you can see, I added a name and a brief description. We can also edit this later, so we don't have to worry too much about this at this stage. You also see that there are some more options, for example, the nicknames, which I have to admit I rarely use, but I heard that they are useful if you have a lot of nodes, if you have long names or similar node names. But let me know if you have hints of how you work with nicknames. The aggregate coding box, we will come back to that later. And about the colors, I'm actually planning to do a short video because it is something I find quite interesting, because it wasn't what I expected when I started working with NVivo. For now, just the name and the brief description, and then we click OK. And now we have the activities and service node, and we want to create some notes within this node. So these are then child notes. For that, we just right click on the node. You can obviously also just click on the node and then go via the node in the top menu. And then we get here. So I just added again a name. I was a bit lazy with the description, and then just click OK. And here we have now the child node. And now I just continue to build the coding framework. I'm not going to show you every single step because it gets very repetitive. But in the end, we then have our 4 child notes of the activities and services, because this resembles the framework document. And then we need to do the same thing for the benefits. We need to create another parent note. We can just right click within the notes box. And then again, I just typed in a name and a brief description and click OK. And we do the same again for child node. And I'm again not showing you every single step because it's repetitive, but in the end you can see that I have a list of child nodes that again are adapted from the framework document. Before we move on, I wanted to show you a couple of things. So when we right click on a node, we then get a list of options, some of which are quite relevant for working with your coding framework. Particularly interesting are the node properties, because here you can change the name and the description of a node. And finally, you can also move a node from one hierarchy level to another. So for example, make it a child node of a sibling or a sibling of a parent. For that, you can follow the cut and paste option that you saw on the last slide when you right click on the node. But I find it handier to just left click on the node and then drag it into the new parent node. And you can see that it worked here. If it doesn't work for you the first time, then just retry it, because it can be a bit fiddly in the beginning. And now that we have our framework, we do some coding and uncoding. For the activities and services, I use the item that I created as externals in tutorial 1. And to open it, I just double click on the item. And here you can now see the document. As you might remember, I just put in the courses and activities that were listed on the home page of this community center. And for the coding now, I just highlight the part of the text, now yoga, that I want to code. And then you can either click on code in the top menu, or, and this is my preferred option, you just right click and press code. And then we get here and we just need to highlight the relevant node. As you can see, we need to first click on the little arrow next to activities and services. And then we get a list here, and I selected health and well-being because I thought yoga fits in here quite nicely, and then I click OK. And as a second example, I highlighted the sewing skills and right click and click on code. And here I now select education and training and click OK. The final example, the computer club. Again, right click and click on code. And here you can see that I can actually also highlight more than one node, in this case education, training, and social and recreational, because I think that a computer course might fit into both of these categories. And after highlighting both, I click OK. We are now back in the notes and we can see the coding that we have done so far. So we can see that we only coded one file and a total of 4 references. To see what we have assigned to a node, we just double click on the node. If you want to, you can also right click on it and pick open, or click on it and then select open in the top menu. After we open the node, we can see a list with all the references. We now only have 2, but if we have more, you will see that there will first be all the references linked to the first item, then the second item, and so on. And if you want to get back to the original item, you then just need to click on the blue hyperlink. And now the document is open, and you can see that our references that link to the education and training node are highlighted in yellow. How do we then uncode? And it's actually very straightforward. So for example, I now decide that the computer club is not really a social activity, it's more an educational activity. So what I then need to do is that I highlight computer club, and then I can either click on uncode in the top menu, or you right click and then select uncode. In any case, you then get back to a window which is similar to the coding window, and you then need to select the node from which you want to uncode. But I wanted to show you here that you can also go via uncode from recent notes. We haven't been using so many notes, so there are only 3 recent notes here, and we then pick the social and recreational one. By the way, this also works for coding, so you can also code from recent notes, and this can actually really speed up the process. And after you've done the uncoding, then the reference obviously disappears from your list of notes. For the second example, we look at the other part of our coding framework, so the benefits of community centers. And here we code the example focus group transcript, which I uploaded in the first tutorial, and we open it by double-clicking on it. And I again highlighted here a relevant text bit, and then right-clicked on it and selected code. And I pick Socialize as the node and then click OK. Another example, it makes me feel less lonely. I highlight it, and here I now go via the recent notes and pick Reduce Isolation. A third example, again a sentence about feeling a bit lonely, and I do exactly the same. I click on Code to a recent note and then select Reduce Isolation. And a fourth example, a sentence where someone talks about how they got motivated to volunteer. And I right click and code from recent notes and then select motivation to volunteer. And when we look at our item here in the focus groups folder, we can see that we have coded 4 text bits, so 4 references to 3 notes, or they are called codes here for some reason. And this is how the list of notes looks like now. To open a note, we again just need to double click on it, or we right click on it and then pick open. Finally, 2 small tricks. The first one relates to the aggregate coding option in the note properties. To get to the note properties, and here we use a parent note, we right click on the note and then select properties. We can obviously already tick this box when we create the note, but we can also go back later and do it then. And we now ticked the box and clicked OK, and we will then see that all the coding from the child note was added to the parent note. You might be wondering, why is this useful? Well, in my experience, reading through everything that is associated with a parent note is very useful, because it can, for example, help you to recheck if your children are actually working, but it can also help you to rethink if your parent note actually covers what all the child notes contain. And finally, we all know that it is quite difficult to start writing and rewriting, and here I think reading through the parent notes can be a good starting point for drafting a section or so, because it gives you a very good sense, a very good overview of this part of your work. The second trick links to the order of notes that NVivo sometimes changes. On the left side, we can see a list of notes in the order that we created them. But then on the right, you can see when we were asked to select a note when we were coding, the notes were listed in a different way. They were listed alphabetically. This is obviously not a big deal, but I have sometimes found this quite annoying. You can change the order of your notes when you right-click in the Notes window and then click on Sort By, and then you select either Name or Created On or another option. However, I actually use a very different and also very simple hack. I have just made it a habit to add numbers to my node names. By this, I can decide what the most convenient order is for me, and NVivo is not going to change it. But if you have more than 9 notes at one hierarchy level, you are better off with using letters, because with numbers, NVivo puts, for example, the number 10 following the number 1 and so on. I also recommend you to consider using different prefixes for different levels of hierarchy. So for example, a capital letter for a parent node and then child node maybe with a number, because then you will have for each node a unique identifier. And this, in my experience, can really make discussions with co-coders much easier. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. Let me know if you found it useful, and also get in touch if anything was unclear or missing. And don't forget that you can download the slides from my website. I also added the link to the video description.